Hi everyone, I hope you've had a good week. I see some of you are right up to date with the coursework and others are coming along. As I said at the beginning, it does take a particular kind of perseverance to carry on through an online course. So do what you can to set up your own schedule and even if you can't answer every posting on the message board, at least try to keep up to date to the extent that you can. I noticed that you responded a lot to each other's first two posts, and did very well. There's a good interaction between you, but the last two didn't have any responses so far, at least at the time I'm taping this. And everybody doesn't have to respond to everything, and please don't get offended if somebody doesn't respond to your post. It's just meant to have a lively interaction the way we might have in a classroom. There was a question, actually there were two questions on the for Unit 1 in the question file. And one was, when do I expect that you would post your summary to the reflection? And, usually I expect when I put a posting there, I would expect that it got completed during that week. I don't shut things down so that you can't move along at your own pace. But I do, pay attention to what's a later post, because the class loses its interaction that way. And it's best when the majority of people can at least stay on top of things and respond to each other within the week's time. The other question was about the research paper. So some ideas, that was a question somebody had. Could I give you some ideas for a research paper? Well, actually, in the coming week's readings, you might find that there are a lot of ideas that get generated as you learn from the Adam book and from the 3 essays in Between Memory and Hope, about how the liturgical year developed and how different kinds of feasts arrived. Maybe there's one feast that particularly attracts your attention and you want to know, well, when did that come into being and how did that happen? What's the decree that went along with that particular feast? Especially when they talk about idea feasts. So maybe there will be some ideas that you find in that reading those readings that will attract your attention. I'll mention them a couple more as we get on during this week's readings, my video introduction to this read. So please do, if you have questions, post them under that week, and I'll either respond directly to you if it's a question for you, or I will respond and say, I'll cover that in the next week's video, okay? So please keep in touch and please try to keep up to date. So the liturgical year, we have 2 chapters that we've read in there this week, and Adam uses, again, metaphors. And actually you'll find that Mark Searle uses a really interesting metaphor too when he gets to his article. But the first metaphor that Adam uses is that of the heart. And the 2 essays this week are about the Paschal Mystery and Sunday. So the Paschal Mystery is the heart of the liturgical year. And one of the points that Adam makes is that the liturgical year just didn't come up from a draftsman's table. And I often say that in the undergraduate liturgy class when I'm teaching. Jesus did not sit the apostles down and say, okay, take out a sheet of paper and write this down, and you do. This is how you do Sunday, and this is how you will have your memory of the Lord's Supper. It didn't happen that way. It evolved over time because of the historical situations and the needs of the people in a particular era. So just be cognizant of that Adam has a great way of putting it. Didn't just sit down at a draftsman's table that way. But so he focuses on the Paschal mystery. And he talks in terms of mystery and what it is and what it isn't. And unfortunately, when I was a child in school, our sister would say, oh, the Trinity, that's a mystery. You can't understand it. As though you can't understand it, so don't bother. Just believe it. Don't bother trying to understand it. Whereas that's the opposite of what mystery is. Although you can't fully understand it, you want to delve into things that you don't understand. Look how popular mysteries are on television or in novels. They draw us in. I have two stories that come to mind regarding mystery. So the first is my friend Marianne's little daughter, Allison. She's now a mother of her own. But when Allison was preparing for her first communion, it was the day or two before, she said to her mother, confessed to her mother, I don't really understand it, how the bread becomes Jesus. And Marianne, who was studying theology, launched into an attempt at an explanation, and Allison, this is age 7, says, no, I know that as I get older, I will understand more. And that's what mystery does. We're drawn more and more into it, and it's revealed in greater depth as we live on. Another is Catherine Lacuna. Catherine was a wonderful theologian. She taught at the University of Notre Dame and died too soon from breast cancer. But Catherine and I went to graduate school together at Fordham. She graduated one semester before I did, but she's probably a decade younger than I. But Catherine told us that when she was 12 years old, she was absolutely captivated by the concept of the Trinity. And she decided that she wanted to spend the rest of her life exploring that. And she did indeed. She was a really fine writer. Her book, God with Us, on the Trinity is extraordinary. She's such a fine teacher. But that's the concept of mystery that Adam is trying to bring out for us. That the mystery, this heart of the liturgical years, the Paschal mystery, that draws us ever more deeply into understanding. The theologian that he quotes is Odo Kassel. Odo was a Benedictine monk. He was born in 1886, died in 1948, and he was a monk of the famous Benedictine abbey Marialach. And Marialach, not far from Cologne, Germany, is really where a center of the liturgical movement. So long before the liturgical movement was happening at all in the United States, really it was happening there at Marialach. So that's where Odo Kassel was schooled and trained, and especially during those years. For most of his life, though, he was the chaplain at a community of Benedictine nuns, cloistered Benedictine nuns, and he helped to make them theologians as well. But his particular area of theology was mystery theology, and wrote very deeply about the mystery and how it should draw us in. So that's one of the names that Adam mentions. And another one he mentions is Joseph Jungmann. Jungmann was a Jesuit who lived also in Germany. And he was an early historian of the liturgy. His book, The Early Liturgy, is one of a fine contribution, classic contribution to liturgical studies. The other metaphor that Adam uses is the sun, which is a great metaphor that he uses for faith. Just as the sun is always there in the sky, it doesn't burn out, but some days it gets clouded over, some days it's very piercing. He uses that for our faith as well. And for Jesus being the new sun, that's same off there, fiery, warming us, bringing us redemption, and he's the new son of salvation. So those are very important concepts that Adam brings out in those two chapters, one on the mystery and one on Sunday. Feasts began to multiply and multiply and multiply, and there were times when, that things had to be organized better. So one of the items in the Constitution on the Liturgy at the Second Vatican Council was about the liturgical calendar, and how there were some feasts that maybe were obscure and perhaps they should be eliminated in preference to things that were more contemporary. And so there was a document drawn up, agreed to, that was the general norms for the liturgical year. And I've posted that document on our website in a new folder called Documents, where I have two documents that I've put in there already. One is this general norms for the liturgical year that Adam refers to. And I also put in there a document that was written by St. John Paul II. And because Adam quotes from the German bishops, I realized that this book is a little dated, and so I put there the Pope's exhortation, St. John Paul II's exhortation on Sunday, Dies Domini, for your reference, if you want to make reference to it in your papers or, in your postings as well. So this week there are just 2 questions on the discussion board, and in each you have a choice. So there's one question about Adam, but you can use either chapter 3 or chapter 4. And don't get too bent out of shape of which one you choose. Just one intrigues you more than the other, and you'd rather write about it. There's not a right way and a wrong way to go about this at all. So this section has 3 essays from Between Memory and Hope. And they all fall under the rubric of From Sabbath to Sunday. And so they're rooted in this historical approach to the liturgical year. And all of the essays are interrelated. They weren't written to be that way, but you'll find a connection between Adam and then the 3 essays that you read. And the 3 writers come from slightly different perspectives. So Boone Porter, he's the author of the first essay. He was an Episcopal priest. He also was a wonderful writer. And, mostly when I picture Boone, I picture somebody who's in a crumpled raincoat. That's mostly how I knew him. He just... that's how he came to our meetings, and he's a very, very fine theologian and thinker and teacher, but, not great into the fashion at all. He's Episcopal, and he refers to the Book of Common Prayer. And as you start reading his essay, you might think, oh, what is all this reference to the Book of Common Prayer? We don't do this. But as you move on through the essay, you'll see how he really focuses on an ecumenical consensus. So really, even though we call our Sundays by different names, the readings for each of the Sundays of the year are the same in the main Roman Catholic Church and the mainline Protestant churches as well. And that in contemporary times, that consensus came. So the example he uses is the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord. So have patience when you move through his essay. Mark Searle is another fine theologian who died too young. Mark was a Franciscan priest. He left the priesthood. He married and had 2 or 3 children. I think they might have 3 children, he and Barbara. And he also died too young of cancer. The metaphor that he uses for the liturgical year at the very beginning of his essay is a carousel. And it's beautiful because it's got energy in it and movement and delight, and you can almost hear the carousel singing as you read his list of things that are on this carousel of the liturgical year. And then he asks a good question there, not one that I put on the discussion board, but he asks a question: what sort of collective imagination do our Sunday practices create? And he's very attentive to the difference between what Sunday celebration means to the clergy and what it means to the laity. And he lived both, so it's good, that's a reason why he's able to make that. But that question, I thought, is really one that bears repeating at some celebrations of Eucharist. So what sort of collective imagination did this Sunday's celebration create or foster for these people? And the third essay that you have there is by Robert Taft, whom you read also last week. And Bob brings together the Eastern Church and the Western Church. So from his approach to Sunday, and to daily Mass, you get a much broader perspective. So we get the ecumenical perspective, and here we also get the East and West perspective. So for those essays, I suggest that on the discussion board you select one of them that maybe had the most impact on you, or that you learned from the most, and then post what you what you learned. Summarize it if you can. So, and then I put in another question there. If you'd rather have 2 of them talk to each other, so if you'd rather have react to both Searle and Taft, for example. And all 3 men were contemporaries, and they all know each other. We were all colleagues together in the North American Academy of Liturgy. If you'd rather do something like that on the discussion board, that's fine too. Okay? So I hope this has given you some other ideas of things that you might be interested in exploring. I think that each of the writers maybe opens up a different area for your research, or maybe something else you'd like to plumb the depths of. And if you want to talk about it individually, that's fine. You know how to call me. You know how to email me, text me. That's fine. I am on campus most days except Friday, as I said before. So engage me in conversation, okay? I will again put on the message board, a discussion board, also a question, if you have any questions that you want to ask about this particular unit, to post them there. All right? Okay, have a good week and enjoy your reading. Bye.